Masechet Gittin Daf Ayin He. We're speaking about the Mishnah of a case when the husband says, "Here is your get on condition that you give me 200 zuz." The beginning of the sugya is going to be, what if he refuses to accept it? Can someone force someone else to accept something? And then we're going to speak more about the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, where a husband says, "Here is your get if you give me my coat," and the coat is lost. And according to Rabbanan, there's no get here because he said, "I want my coat," and that's precisely, we have to follow his precise wording. Whereas according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, it's sufficient that she pay for the amount of the coat, and so as long as the value is paid for, you don't need the actual coat. And so we'll talk more about that. That was a story that happened in Sidan. All right, so Tanan Hatam, we're going to bring in a Mishnah from Arachin as a comparison of giving something to someone by force. Barishona hi nitman yom shenem asar chodesh kedei sheyeh halut lo hitkin hilel hazaken sheyeh cholesh et ma'otav lalishka v'yeh shober et hadelet v'nichnas ve'ematay shirseh hala Yavo v'yitol et ma'otav. We're talking about the Torah law that someone who sells a house in a walled city has a right to go and buy it back, to redeem the house within 12 months. Now, once the 12th month comes, here's what people would do. The buyers, they didn't want the seller to come back and take the house. And the seller, he might not be redeeming it right away. He might wait till he gets the money back together, till he gets a chance to come and redeem it. So just in case the seller waits till last minute, he might wait till the last day, right? The last day of the 12th month. That would be sometimes the most likely day that the seller would come to redeem his home. So buyers, you know what they would do? They would go hide themselves on that last day of the 12th month. That way they couldn't be found. And the seller says, "Wait, I want to redeem my house. I have the money," right? He's just looking for the buyer. Here's the money, and I want to get my house back. So he would be in hiding so that he could not accept the money, and it would remain permanently in his own, in the buyer's ownership. Okay, so that's what people were doing. And this was not very fair because the Torah says the seller has a year to redeem it back. And now they don't have a chance. That last day, it's a critical day. Sometimes people wait till the last minute, but they still have a right to get it. So it's not fair that the buyer should go hide himself. And so Hillel made a takana that a person, the seller, if he can't find the buyer, that's okay. He can just take the money and deposit it in the treasury of the Bet HaMikdash. Right? He says, "Here, this is the money. I'm putting it here for the buyer. He can come and pick it up anytime he wants." And that is payment. And then he can go and break down the door of his own house that he now redeemed, and he can enter it whenever he wants. And the buyer, who now is no longer his, the buyer can go pick up his money anywhere and anytime that he wants. So he's basically depositing it with a third party that happens to be the Bet HaMikdash. And that is considered, Hillel made a takana. From now on, that's considered giving money to the buyer. If the buyer decides to hide himself, that's good, and that's good enough. Okay, now the fact that he had to make a takana about this means that was not the original law. So v'amar Rava, mitakanato shel Hillel nishma, harei ze gitech al menat shetiteni li 200 zuz, v'natna lo mida'ato megoreshet, al korcho ena megoreshet. Midi istrich le Hillel l'takoneh netina be'al korche tahavya la netina. Rava says, I'll explain this part first, from the fact that Hillel had to make a takana that giving something against a person's will is considered giving. That means without the takana of Hillel, in general, giving something by force is not considered giving. If UPS delivers something to my home and I refuse delivery, right? I have a right to refuse delivery. I don't want this. Take it back. Someone gave me some giant gift. I have no room for it. All right, so I can refuse delivery. So that was the original law. Someone can refuse delivery. And then Hillel had to make a special takana for redeeming homes and said, okay, in this particular case, you can force forcibly give a payment by doing the method of depositing in the Bet HaMikdash. Now that we know that that was the original law, that's the law that applies elsewhere, Rava says we can apply this to a get. If a husband says, here's your get, on condition that you pay me 200 zuz, and she then gives him the 200 zuz with his consent, he accepts the money, she is indeed divorced. That's a fulfillment of the condition. But if it's against his will, he says, no, I don't want it, I don't want the 200 zuz, I'm not accepting it, he puts his hands behind his back, right, and he refuses to accept it, denied delivery, then she is not divorced, right, even if she puts it in his house, puts it in his pocket. It's against his will, not megoreshet. So that's the rule. So that's how Rava is comparing this law of Hillel's takana, but the original law is that you cannot forcibly give something to someone, and therefore the husband, even after he gives the get with this condition, and she's willing to fulfill the condition, if the husband, refuses to accept it, the get will not go through. Matkif la Rapapa. Rapapa, however, for the next generation, a student of Rava objects to this. Isavite marav Shimi bar Ashe, vedilma ki isterich le'letakone shelo befanav, al befanav ben mida'ato ben be'al korcho havya netina. So he says, no, how do you know that was the takana was because you cannot forcibly give something to someone, and now he made a takana that you can? Maybe that wasn't the takana at all. Maybe really the rule is that you can give something to someone else by force. And therefore, in the case of the get, she can forcibly deposit the money to him. So in that case, what was the need for the takana? Because it's about giving him the money, not in his presence. But in his presence, whether he wants it or not, it is considered giving. So in other words, really the original law, the law across the board for get also is that if the person's there, right, the husband is there, and she has the money, and she stuffs it in his pocket, puts it on his head, right, forcibly gives it to him, that is considered an actual giving. If he's not there and she just deposits it in his courtyard, but he's not there and he refuses, says, I don't want it, then normally that would not be called giving. In this case, Rabban Hillel said, well, he's hiding, right? So this actually makes sense, because they would hide themselves so that they wouldn't receive anything. And so Hillel had to say, even if you hide yourself and you're not there and you're refusing and you made an announcement, I don't want that money, nevertheless, if she deposits it in some place, a P.O. box in the Bet HaMikdash, the seller deposits it, then that is considered giving. And so therefore we do not have a proof from this Mishnah in Arachin to the case of Gittin, and it could be that in a get, giving it by force in front of him, in fact, would be giving. All that is one version of that discussion. Now the opposite version. V'ika de'amre, amar Rava mitakanato shel Hillel, harezi gitecha menashe tetini li 200 zuz, v'natna lo ben midato ben mibal korcho havya netina, v'chi yisterich le'Hillel takune shelo befanav, aber befanav ben midato ben bal korcho havya netina. In this version, Rava is starting off with Rav Papa's conclusion here. So he's trying to prove the opposite. Based on the takanav Hillel, who said that if she wants to give him something by force, if the seller wants to give the buyer money by force to redeem his own land, yes, he can do that. So we see from there that giving by force is considered giving. So we can learn that if a woman wants to give 200 zuz to fulfill the condition by force and he refuses, then that's good. Whether he accepts it or it's against his will, that is considered a giving, as long as it's in front of him. Now Hillel had to make his takana when the husband is missing, he's hiding. So Hillel had to make a special law, even though he's hiding, he has to accept this money if it's deposited in the Bet HaMikdash. But if he's not in hiding, if the person's there, whether he wants it or he does not want it, that is considered giving. So according to this, Rabbi is learning the opposite of the first version, that forcible giving in front of him is considered a proper giving. But then, matkif lada papa v'tem Rav Shimi bar Asher v'dilma afilu befanav nameh midato in al korcho la v'hilel mai de'isterich le takin. Rav Papa says that's not necessarily a proof. Maybe even in front of him, it has to be with his will, and you cannot force someone to accept something against their will. Hillel needed to make a takana in order that the money should be accepted against his will, whether he's there or not there. The original law is you cannot force someone to accept something, and Hillel said, okay, now you know what, for the redeeming houses we force someone to accept something, but the analogy to get, because there's no equivalent takana in get, the wife cannot forcibly give the 200 zuz to the husband, whether he's there or not. So he rejects it. Either way, Rav Papa rejects. You learn something from these two versions that it seems that the students would memorize sugyot as a structure, right? Rava made a comparison between arachin and gittin regarding forcibly giving something. Rav Papa rejected that, right? But then you can fill in what did he prove and what was rejected. But what's equivalent between the two versions is the basic structure. Okay. Amar bar Hana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. כל מקום ששנה רבן שמעון בן גמליאל במשנתנו הלכה כמותו, חוץ מערב וסיידן וראיה אחרונה. So Rabbi Yochanan says, anytime we have Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in the Mishnah, we follow him for halacha. Even though he's a minority opinion, the halacha goes with him. Except for a case of an arev. This is a case of a creditor who says, I will be able to collect my debt either from you, the debtor, or from your guarantor. And according to Rabbanan, he can go, and even if the debtor himself has property, if he feels like taking the guarantor's property, he can. Rashbag, however, says, no, if the debtor himself has property, the creditor can only take from the debtor. Only if the debtor doesn't have property, then he can go to the guarantor. So halacha is not like Rashbag in this case. This is one of the exceptions. The second exception is Saidan. That's in our Mishnah. If the husband says you are divorced, if you give me my coat, and then the coat is lost, Rashbag says that's it. That's okay. She can pay with the money. The monetary equivalent is the intention that counts, and he wants that item or the equivalent. So he's more lenient. However, Rabbanan says we follow the words exactly, and if she doesn't give the coat, even though she doesn't have it, and it's out of her control, nevertheless it's not a get, and halacha follows Rabbanan here as well. And in the third case, that's an exception to the rule, is Re'aya Acharona. If someone says, I have no evidence, I have no witnesses, but afterwards they come and they bring further evidence or further witnesses, Rashbag says that's okay, you can accept it. But Rabbanan said no, they already said they have no further evidence, they cannot bring more evidence later. And again here, halacha follows Rabbanan. Alright, Teno Rabbanan, Harezik itech v'haniyar sheli ena megoreshet. Very interesting baraita that says, if the husband says, here is your get, but the paper is mine. No good, that's not a divorce, because you have to give a bill of divorce, and without the paper, what's left? Just ink, right? You can't have writing you can't have foreground without background. You cannot have writing, ink without paper. You can have ink in a bottle without paper, but that's not called writing. Writing for something to be letters needs something to be written upon for it to hold together. So this makes no sense. So he has to give a bill of divorce. There is no bill of divorce here, so it's not a get. However, the second case is here is your get on condition that you give me back the paper. Well, then that's okay. And so I think this is understandable because there is a difference of never giving the paper in the first place, whereas in the second case, he gives the paper, but then she has to return it. But this will hinge on how we understand the almenat. We saw before there's a question of does almenat apply retroactively or not? Let's assume right now that it does not apply retroactively. It applies at the time of giving. and at the time that the condition is fulfilled. If so, the husband says, "Here is your get," on condition when it will happen. It will take effect when you give it back. Well, then you see the problem. When she gives it back to him, she doesn't have it anymore. So how could you say the get takes effect when she is no longer in possession of the paper? And so you see that the difference between, if you follow that, it's not clear what the difference is between the first and second case, and that's exactly what the Gemara asks. What is the difference? How come in the first case when he says the paper is mine, the get is no good, but when he says this will be your get when you give it back to me, then it's good? Isn't that the same thing? She's still giving back to him the paper, and so in both cases she does not have the paper, and so at the time we want the get to be effective, and so how could it be effective in either case? All right, we're going to see 5 different answers to this. First one, Amar Rav Chisda, Hamaneh Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Hida Amar, Titen lo et ameha, hachanameh efshar demefayesa le bedameh. So Rav Chisda says, this baraita is the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says in the case of a coat, you don't actually have to give the coat, you can give the value of the coat. And here also, he gives her the get and says, on condition that you give me back the paper. Well, she doesn't have to give him the paper itself. How much is that paper worth, right? $2? Okay, here's $2. I'm paying you for this paper. And then that will fulfill the condition. And that's why in this case, migoreshet, because you can fulfill the condition with money. In the first case, there's no way to be divorced if he keeps the paper the entire time. All right, that's answer number 1. Matkifla Abaye emud Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel hecha delete be'aneh hecha deite be'aneh mi amar. So Abaye says no. Even Rashbag may not agree when the item is actually here. Rabban Gamliel, Rashbag rather, said his halacha only in the case where the coat is lost. So she has no ability to fulfill the condition literally. Therefore, okay, she can do second best and she can give money. But if it's actually there, if the coat's there, Rashbag may very well say you have to return the coat. And here also, the get exists. She has it in her hands. So if it exists, she has to give the get back, the paper back. She cannot pay for it. So even Rashbag would not agree that it would be megoreshet until she gives the paper back. But once she gives it back, she doesn't have it anymore, so it cannot take effect. So therefore, we reject Rav Chisda's, at least Abaye rejects Rav Chisda's answer, and he offers a second one. Ela Amar Abaye hamaneh bi meir hi damar ba'ainan tenai kaful v'hacha ha'ala kafle litnaeh. We're following the Bi Meir. We're going to see the Bi Meir's opinion, the source of it on tomorrow's daf. But Rabbi Meir says, in order for a condition to be legally valid, it has to be a double condition, like Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, right? Who said, Moshe told them, if you go into the land and fight with us, then you can inherit the land on the other side of the Jordan. If you do not come and fight with us, then you cannot have it. You have to say it in the positive and in the negative. And so the problem in this baraita, this baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and the problem with this baraita, he only said al menat shetachziri li taniyad, on condition that you give it back to me. In order so this condition is null and void. In order to make the condition valid, he would have to say, and if you have to say both. If you return it to me, then it is a good get. If you don't return it to me, it's not a good get. And so he didn't say both, and that's why it's no good. Matkif le Rava. Okay, so Rava rejects that second answer, and he offers a third. First, the rejection. You're telling me that the only reason why it's a good get is because the condition is invalid, because he didn't double it. So, but if he did double it, then it would be a good get. Now, where does anybody learn the prototype of the proper condition is from Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, that I just mentioned. So based on that, Rava says, I can add yet another problem with the formula that in the Braita, and even if it was said in a double way, there would be an additional problem. And that way, it doesn't have to be only to be meir. Ma hatam tenai kodem lemaaseh, af kol tenai kodem lemaaseh, lapukei achad lemaaseh kodem litnai. You always have to have the condition first, and then the consequence after. If you go into the land, then if you fight with us, then you can have the land as an inheritance. You can't say it the other way around. And here, right, look at the language that he says, this is your get, if you give it back to me. The problem is it's the wrong way. You have to, if you flip it around, then it'll be okay. It says, if you give it back to me, then it's a good get. And if you don't give it back to me, then it's not a good get. You have to say the condition first and the consequence second. And that's the problem here. That's why in the sefa is a good get, because the condition was not formulated correctly, so the condition is invalid. All right, so that is the third opinion. Ela Rava mishum demaseh kodem litnai. So that's how he explains the Braita. Now we have a fourth. Matkif la Rav Ada bar Ahava tama demaseh kodem litnai ha tenai kodem lemaseh lahave gita. So Rav Ada bar Ahava says, is that the only problem you have? The only problem is that you put the consequence before the condition, but if you put the condition first and the consequence after, then the condition would be a valid condition, and then if she and then it would not be a good get. If she doesn't give it back, it's not a good get. Even if she does give it back, it's not a good get because it's not in possession at the time that it takes effect. So would that what you would say? Mikdi kol tenei mehecha gamrin an lahu metenei bnei Gad bnei Reuven. Ma hatam tenei bedavar echad u'maaseh bedavar acher. Af kol apukeh hacha detenei u'maaseh bedavar echad. So he says, I have another problem with it. And even if it was formulated in the double way, and even if it was formulated with the condition first and the consequence after, still has to fit another criteria that it has to be about a different issue. The condition and the consequence have to be about a different issue. Like Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven, if you fight within the land of Israel, then you can inherit something outside the land of Israel. But this comes to exclude here our case, where it's about the very same matter. It's about the bill of divorce, and you have a contradiction in terms because you say this is yours on condition that you give it back. And you're saying, and it's only yours when you give it back. So that doesn't make sense. It's like saying, I'll only accept that if you don't give it to me, right? That doesn't make sense. If I don't give it to me, then how could, right? It's circular reasoning. And so you can't have the condition and the consequence be about the very same subject in such a way that the fulfillment of the condition negates the possibility of the consequence. So therefore Rav Ada says that is the problem here, that it's about the same matter, and if once the condition is fulfilled, then the get cannot be hers because the condition says she has to give the get back, so then it can't be fulfilled. All right, so that's the fourth explanation. Rav Asher Amar Hamane Rabbi Damar Ravuna Marav Kol Omer Almenat Keomer Me'arshav Dameh. And now the last answer, which is actually the simplest. It looks like this is really the peshat of that baraita, is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says, who says, and anytime you say almenat, when you put a condition, it's the same as saying from now. Even if you don't say me'arshav, that's implicit. And therefore, husband is saying, here is your divorce that will take effect from now, once you give it back, right? Retroactively after you give it back, and therefore it's perfectly logical that the sefa should be fine. The resha was, here is your get, but I'm giving you the get, but the paper is mine. Paper is mine. You're not giving her anything. You didn't give her a bill of divorce. That's no good. But if I'm giving it to you and I'm saying it'll take effect right now, on condition that at some point you give it back to me, that's okay, because I did give it to you and it is yours at that time, and it takes effect at that time when it's in your home, when it's in your hand. So it takes effect right away, and later on you simply fulfill the condition by giving it back. So that's a simple explanation. You see that the Talmud knew this answer the whole time, but I think all the previous answers were like, oh, here's another problem that we could potentially find with this, and each one's adding another problem to the other, and so we learned a lot about all the requirements of legal conditions. So that's a beautifully structured sugya. All right, and now atken Shemuel begita d'shchi mera im lo mati lo yehe get ve'im mati yehe get. More about the formulations of conditions that when someone is on his deathbed, right? We said that we know that someone on his deathbed, we take his words very seriously, and even his words can effectuate a transaction, whereas usually you would have to write it down or do some kind of act of transmission. So Shemuel said, listen, in order to obviate any problems or misunderstandings of ambiguous language, Shemuel said, if someone on his deathbed, and if they want to give a get to their wife, we should instruct them to use the following formula. If I do not die, it will not be a get. If I die, then it should be a get. And then it'll be clear. In case he gets better, we'll know what happens. Because otherwise, if he says, I give my wife a get, and then he gets better, so what did he mean? Did he mean only if he dies, or he wants it to be a get anyway? So let him make a double condition, and that way it'll be totally clarified, and also it'll have a double condition, which is good. Okay, velema imati yeheget, ve'im lo mati lo yeheget. So now we ask, why is he saying, it seems like in a backwards order? He should say the positive first. If I die, this is a get. If I don't die, this is not a get. Right? Doesn't that make sense logically, to say if the condition is fulfilled first rather than if it's not fulfilled? And the answer is, la maktim inish puranutala nafsheh. A person does not want to make something negative about himself come first. You don't want to start off a statement saying, if I die, this is a get, right? You want to push that off. Try to live as long as possible. So that's why, just to have the language be nicer, he says, if I don't die, hopefully I won't die. I really don't want this, but my first choice is, I won't die and this won't be a get. But what can I do? If I should die, then this will be a get. So that's why a person says it in that order. Okay, velema lo yeheget im lo mati ba'inan tanai kodem lemaaseh. And that says, how come you don't say it in the phrase itself? Switch the clauses, and how come you don't say this is not a get if I don't die? How come you start off with if I don't die? It will not be a get. Say, it will not be a get if I don't die. And the answer is, as we said before, you need the condition first and then the consequence. If I don't die, then it's not a get. If I do die, then it is a get. So we have to formulate it correctly. Matkif la rava, mikidi kol tenai mehecha gamrinan metene b'nei Gad u'bnei Reuven. Ma'atam hen kodem lelav, afkol la'puke hacha delav kodem lehen. Rava challenges Shemuel. Right, Shemuel, I understand. You got the double positive and negative in there, and you put the condition first and the consequence later. But you didn't fulfill another thing that we should always have in the condition, that you should always have if the condition is fulfilled first, and only then if it's not fulfilled. Just like with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, Moshe says, if you come and conquer the land, then you can take your land. If you do not, then you cannot. So we should have the condition for being fulfilled first, and then the not being fulfilled. So your formula is not good, because you had the negative first and then the positive. Ela amar Rava, im lo mati lo yehe get, im mati yehe get, im lo mati lo yehe get. So Rava adds another few words to the formula to say it as follows: if I do not die, it will not be a get. If I do die, it will be a get. And then you repeat, if I do not die, it won't be a get. Why do you do all that? To fulfill all the requirements. Im lo mati lo yehe get, lo maktim inish panuta lenafsheh. You want to start off with the thing that you hope for, and the calamity that might happen. You don't want to start off with that as if that's what you want to happen. So therefore, you start off with the hopeful. Hopefully, I won't die, and this won't be a get. So that's why you put that first. But then you say, imati yehe get, im lo mati lo yehe get, ba'ainan hen kodem lelav. But then you say the positive in the sense that the condition is fulfilled, and then the negative, the condition is not fulfilled, so that Rava can fulfill his requirement, as he just said. So you say, if I do die, it will be get. If I don't die, it will not be a get. And that way you have the yes before the no, but he's adding in another no beforehand, so for that hopefully he will live. And by making that sandwich, you fulfill all of the requirements, and that is therefore the best formula that someone on his deathbed should say. Mishnah, הרזה גיתך, על מנת שתשמשי את אבא, על מנת שתניקי את בני, כמה היא מניקתו, 2 שנים. Husband gives a get to his wife and says, here is your get on condition that you continue to serve my father. Maybe, while they were married, she was giving breakfast to her father-in-law. And so he says, listen, we're not getting along. We should get divorced, but my father really depends on you coming and taking care of his breakfast. And so this is your get, but you need to continue doing that. Or let's say they have a child. And officially, once they get divorced, so the husband has to take care of the child, but the child is a baby and needs its mother to nurse. So he says, okay, we're getting divorced on condition that you continue to nurse the baby. So she has to do that in order to be for the divorce to happen. Now, how long, right? In this case, he doesn't give a time limit. So the answer is 2 years, right? Until the baby is 2 years old, that's a standard amount of nursing. After that, the baby can eat other things and can get along. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shemona Asar Chodesh, 18 months. That's sufficient, and the baby can already start eating other mushy things and can live without nursing. Now, it doesn't say how long she would have to take care of her father-in-law, her ex-father-in-law. In the first case, it could be that there's no time limit because presumably this is an elderly person who can't take care of himself. Kind of like a baby, but unlike a baby, when the baby gets older, the baby can start getting along without nursing, whereas a person gets older and older, probably they're still going to need help. So it could be that she will have to take care of the father forever, until he dies. Okay, meta ben or meshemeta av hareze get. If the child dies or the husband dies, the get is fulfilled, right? Even if it's before 2 years, and she nursed this child it could be her child, it could be whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a condition. His child, maybe from some different mother. The point is, if the child dies, let's say after 1 month, and she tried her best, right? She's willing, she's there, she's willing to nurse the child, but the child died. So that's good enough. She fulfilled the condition, at least she fulfilled the intention of what he wanted her to do. There's nothing else that she could do. So that fulfills the condition, and she is divorced. Now, next case, הרזה גיתך על מנת שתשמשי את אבא 2 שנים, על מנת שתניקי את בני 2 שנים, מת הבן, או שאמר האב אי אפשי שתשמשני, שלא בהקפדה, אינו גט. Now, the first case, the husband did not give a time limit. So we assume what the time limit would be. Here, the husband does say a time limit and says, here is your get on condition that you will serve my father for 2 years, or that you will nurse this baby for 2 years if the baby dies, or if the father says, I don't want you to serve me, right? I'm good. I don't need you. Even if it's not in anger. If it's in anger, that means she didn't do a good job, right? Yeah, you keep burning the toast every morning, right? Forget it. I don't want your help. So then she's doing a good job, and you could say she's doing a bad job, and you could say, well, that doesn't fulfill the condition. She wasn't doing it to his liking. But the Shelo B'Hakbada says, even if he's not angry, he's just like, you know what? I can take care of it myself. I'm okay. Thank you for your help, but I want to be independent. Even so, it's not a get. Why? Because the husband said 2 years, specifically 2 years. So even if it's out of her control, the child died, the father refuses to be served, still, she did not do that item for 2 years, and therefore it's not a get. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, kazeh get. Kelal amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, kol akava she'ena hemena, hareh zeh get. Rashbag says, in a case like this, the get is valid, because he has a general rule, any hindrance to the fulfillment of the condition that is not from her, meaning it's out of her control, it is a good get. Similar, just like we said regarding the coat. The coat is lost. What can I do? I can't give you the coat back. I can give you money, right? And he's okay with it. So just like Rashbag was lenient there, so too he is lenient here, as long as if she refuses or does a bad job, then that's the same as refusing, then she's not fulfilling it. But if it's out of her control, then she tried to fulfill the condition as much as possible, but she cannot. Because the baby died or the father refuses, then it is a valid get. Okay, now we ask, Umi ba'inan kulehai, urmin hi shimashto yom echad vehenikato yom echad hareh zeh get. We're assuming that this baraita is a case where the husband doesn't specify a time, like the Resha in our Mishnah. He just says, here, take care of my father, or nurse my baby. According to this baraita, as long as she does it even for one day, she serves her father-in-law, ex-father-in-law one breakfast, or nurses the child for one day, she fulfilled technically the condition. All he said is, if you nurse this baby, she nursed it one time, okay, or one day, that's good enough, and that is a get. So this is a challenge to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says without a condition, she has to do it for, let's say, take the baby for 2 years. For the ex-father-in-law, also might be 2 years, or maybe till for his whole life. So how can we resolve this contradiction? We'll see a few ways. Amar Rav Chisda, la kashya, harabanan v'haraban Shimon ben Gamliel, says one of these sources, either the Mishnah or the Baraita, is Rabbanan, and the other is the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel regarding what they said about the coat. Now, which one is which? We're going to try both ways. Matnitin Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel uBaraita Rabbanan. The Mishnah that says that it has to be for a long time, for 2 years or 18 months, that would be Rashbag. Why? Just like in the case of a coat, the husband says, I want my coat back. His point was he wants that financial benefit. He wants the full financial benefit of it. And so if she cannot provide the coat because it's lost, then she pays for it. And that's okay. Here also we assume that when he said, I want you to nurse the baby or take care of my father, he wants the full financial benefit of that. Meaning the maximum of how much the baby needs or how much the father needs. And it's not just one day, right? So we look at the intention, and we assume the intention is for full financial benefit, and that's why you need the longest time possible. The Baraita, on the other hand, says Rabbanan. Rabbanan say, we follow the technicality of the wording, both lechumra or lekula. In the case of a coat, it was lechumra. He said, I want the coat. You cannot be divorced without the coat. She can pay all the money in the world, but it will not help because there is no coat here, right? And the condition says, I want the coat. And so to here, the condition says, if you nurse the baby. Now, maybe someone hearing that would say, oh, nurse the baby must be until the baby can eat solid foods. But the technical wording is, if this is your get if you nurse the baby. She nursed it for one day, I did it. You didn't give a time period. You didn't say for 1 year or 2 years. And therefore, I did it one day, it's fine. So Rashbag follows the intention of monetary benefit, and the Rabbanan follow the technical wording. Okay, so that's their first proposal, but we rejected. Hamid Sefa, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel have, Mikilal Deresha, Lav Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The Sefa here quotes Rashbag, where he says if they die, or the husband says I don't want it, so Rashbag says it is a get because it's out of her control. So you see that this is opinion of Rashbag at the end. It sounds like everything before that, the Resha, is not the opinion of Rashbag. So therefore it does not make sense to say that the Resha of the Mishnah is Rashbag. Ela Baraita Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel he demekel bin bitnai. B'tna'eh matnitin Rabbanan. Rather, we can argue the other way around, that the Braita is in fact Rashbag, who is lenient regarding conditions. And so rather than what we said before, that the main point of the code is the intention for financial benefit, no, it's just say he's being lenient. He said it, the husband said conditions, I want the coat. If she can fulfill it in some other way, like by paying, then that's okay. And also here, he is lenient and says if it's out of her control, then that's okay. And so too in this Braita is Rashbag, if it can be interpreted in some way to be lenient for her, and technically she fulfilled it because she did one day and that's all he said, he didn't give a time limit, then that's okay. So Rashbag is always going to be lenient, whereas Rabbanan are going to be stringent, and stringent might mean I want the actual coat, and in this case stringent would mean I said nurse the baby, I meant nurse it until it can eat on its own, right? Nurse it the whole way through. One day is not what I meant to say. Because he's stringent. All right, so that's the second answer. Third answer, Rava Amar, La Kashya kan bistam, kan bimfaresh. He says that the Mishnah is when there's no specification, as it says, just nurse the baby, whereas the Baraita is when he specifies, nurse it for one day, and that's why it's okay. So it could all be Rabbanan. And here, even though it doesn't say so, he said, "Can you nurse it for one day?" And she did. She nursed it for one day, and that's why it's a valid get. All right, Rav Ashi Amar Kol Setam Name Kim Faresh Yom Echad Dameh. Rav Ashi is not giving an answer to the contradiction. He's saying a separate comment on the Mishnah. Then anytime if you don't specify a time period, then it's as if you're saying one day. All we can assume is one day if you don't actually say a time period. All right, now challenge to Rav Ashi. Tenan kamahi menikato sheteshanim. Rabbi Yehuda omer shemona asar chodesh. Bishlama l'Ravanicha el Rav Ashi lama li sheteshanim lama li shemona asar chodesh b'yom echad sageh. Now, we brought in Rav Ashi just to challenge him from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says, without any time limit, husband says, I want you to nurse my child. How much does she have to nurse him? 2 years. Rabbi Yehuda says 18 months. According to Rabba, I understand it makes sense, because he gave no condition. So no condition, we assume, is the amount of time necessary for the child until it can eat. But according to Rav Ashi, who says no time period means one day, so then why would you need 2 years or 18 months? One day should be enough. And so the answer is, this is what the Mishnah means to say, Yom echad mi sheteh shanim lapukel achar sheteh shanim dela. Yom echad mi shemona asar chodesh lapukel achar shemona asar chodesh dela. Rav Ashi can interpret our Mishnah to mean that the husband is saying, here, I want you to nurse this child, and if he doesn't say anything, she only has to do it for one day. But according to Tanakama, that one day has to be within 2 years of the baby's birth. What, she's going to come back when 20 years later, and this kid's 20 years old. It's okay, I'm here ready to nurse. No, that adult does not need nursing anymore. We're talking about when it's a baby. You only have to do it one day. But you have to do it within the time period that it requires it. So that's either 2 years or 18 months. According to the 18 months, if she comes after 19 months and says, I'm ready to nurse the child, no good. Too late. It only has to be one day, but it has to be within that time period. And now we have another challenge against Rav Ashi. From the next part of the Mishnah. Here's your get. If you serve my father for 2 years, Amana shetniket beni shete shanim met haben o shamara av if she tasham b'sheni shelo b'hakpada eno get. Or nurse the child for 2 years. If the child dies, or the father says, not in anger, I want to take care of myself, I don't need you to serve me, it's not a get because she didn't do anything. So bishlam al Rava resha b'dela peresh sefa de paresh. So this makes sense according to Rava why we have two cases. The first case of the Mishnah is when there was no specified time, so it's teaching us what the expected time is. And the Sefa is where he did have an expected time, but then Rashi wasn't able to do anything without that. So I understand why we need two cases, one with unspecified time, one with specified time. El Rav Asher, Maishana Resha, Maishana Sefa. According to Rav Asher, where unspecified time is the same as saying 1 day, so then both the first clause and the second clause, both specified times, just happens to be one that says 1 day, one says 2 years, but they're really essentially the same case. Why would I need both? Kashya, that is indeed a serious challenge against Rav Asher. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.